The state budget has been later every year that Kathy Hochul has been governor. And if you're counting, that's 5 years. But this year, the focus is on whether there will or won't be new taxes and how New York City will fill a budget gap. State Senator John Liu is in the thick of the negotiations because he chairs the City Education Committee, and the mayor wants to delay class size stringence so that instead of having to have them start in the fall with 80% being classes between 20 and 25, he wants to delay it. You're the head of the committee that has to deal with it. What are your thoughts?
Well, as you know, class size reduction has been a huge priority of not only me, but many of my colleagues in the state legislature. The governor signed a law in 2022 that requires New York City reduce its overcrowded class sizes down to state and national norms. And there was a 6-year phase-in. We are now we're about to be in year 5 of that phase-in, where by September of 2026,
that's this September.
Yeah, that's this coming September. The city's supposed to have 80% of class rooms in compliance with the limitations, 20 to 25 students, depending on the grade. And then by 2028, September 2028, it should be, I'm sorry, September 2027, it should be fully phased in.
But that costs an awful lot of money. And this mayor is saying, let's pull it back. How do you feel about it?
I feel fine with giving this new mayor an extra couple of years. We've talked about, instead of having an 80%, then 100%, having a steadier phase-in of 70, 80, 90, and 100% by September of 2029. I think it's reasonable because from the get-go, Mamdani has been saying that he supports reducing class sizes in New York City so that all kids can get a sound basic education. And he's doing so in a very difficult situation because the previous administration did so little to get to those targets. So I think it's a reasonable request so long as they have a very clear plan on how to achieve ultimately that 100% compliance.
But see, there's going to be people who are going to say the mayor speaks out of both sides of his mouth, because when he campaigned, he said that it was absolutely a non-negotiable that you keep the class size mandates. And even on the first day of school in September, he said, and I quote, "The question of compliance has often been a point of negotiation, and that shouldn't happen." So now all of a sudden, now that he sees the reality of budget deals, he says he has to make a change.
Well, I am elated that you are holding him to his word. I think every public servant, including the mayor, should be accountable. But in this is a situation where he did inherit a very difficult task. And so rather than having potentially a chaotic roll into the full compliance, I think it's reasonable to have a 70, 80, 90, 100% compliance so long as they are able to produce a very coherent plan on how to get to those goals.
But how much money does this really save New York City?
Well, it doesn't. The delay in the full implementation was never meant to be a source of budgetary relief.
But it is now being regarded as a source.
Well, that's what the administration has said. I've actually pushed back quite a bit, saying that this is not about budgetary relief. The legislature, both the Senate and the Assembly, have already proposed ways to provide New York City with the budgetary relief that they need. Delaying class size reduction is not a source, as far as I'm concerned, it's not going to be a source of fiscal relief, but it's a way to allow the city to more systematically get to the goals.
Yeah, but if it's not going to provide fiscal relief, why do it?
Because it's highly unrealistic that the city will get to the 80% this coming September and 100 the next year. But it is much more realistic and more, I think it's more orderly to get to a 70, 80, 90, 100%. Again, I wish the previous administration had gotten us to the goals much quicker, but unfortunately they kept calling this, they kept complaining about the law instead of doing something about it.
So you're saying they didn't build the schools and they didn't hire enough teachers?
That's exactly right. It's not rocket science. In order to alleviate the overcrowding in New York City public school classrooms, we need more teachers, we need more classrooms. And so Chancellor Samuels has actually done a really good job to begin to develop this classroom build-out plan. We're waiting for the final plan before we go ahead and change the law for the timetable. And also, as you know, the question of mayoral control will come up as well this year.
Before we get to mayoral control, I want to talk to you about the question of equity. Because if you take a look at the money that was given to schools to reduce their class size, it turns out that there are studies that show that schools in low-performing districts got a lot more money to reduce their class size, and that the more affluent schools, where there's a big rush to everybody wants to get into the classroom, they have bigger class sizes, and you're going to have to give more money to affluent schools. Does that create a problem for you and a mayor who feel that we want to be equal and progressive?
I don't think it creates a problem at all, because this has been a struggle for 30 years now. 10 years of litigation led to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity decision 20 years ago, where the judges ruled that New York City school kids were not getting sound basic education because there were too many kids in the classroom. They did not get enough attention from the teacher. And so now, 20 years later, many of the high needs districts, they've already had their class sizes reduced. But there are still
But that's
many.
a good thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. But we need that for every school kid in the city of New York. The courts ruled, and the state constitution says that every kid deserves a sound basic education, which is precluded when the class sizes are still too large.
But here's the issue. You have to have classrooms, enough classrooms, and enough buildings in order to do that. And there have been reports that you need $1.7 billion to build more schools. But the current chancellor says, let's use existing buildings. So my question to you is this. If you try to use some existing buildings, which now charter schools want to use, is that going to push charter schools out?
It's not a one-size-fits-all. The chancellor and his team, they've done what I think is a great job of making an inventory district by district, and in some cases, school by school. There are some schools that still have more space within the building where they can build more classrooms. There are other schools where there's no more space within the building, but outside on school grounds, there's more land, so there's the potential to build another wing or annex. And then, of course, there are overcrowded school districts where they just simply need to build more classrooms by building brand new school buildings. So there's different ways of approaching this, and I think this is up to the chancellor to come up with this solid plan.
So we only have about a minute left, but I'm curious, mayoral control of the schools, you think it's going to pass, and how many years?
Well, we're not at the stage where we have an alternate system ready to propose, but so I think the governor has proposed a 4-year extension to mayoral control.
Is that too long?
It's not going to happen. It's going to be, how about this? I think it's going to be 2 years plus or minus 1.
You're giving yourself a lot of leeway, but why not 4?
4 years, I think many of my colleagues in the legislature think it's too long for an unproven administration. So we want to see that this administration can deliver results for our public schools, and that includes coming in compliance with class size law. It also requires that our schools deliver better results for our students.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but we will be right back. We are back with Queen State Senator John Liu. So now we talk about the ever-popular budget, the fact that in Albany, the budget, as we speak, is already late and has been late for all 5 years of Kathy Hochul's term in office. But my question to you is this. The big issues, first of all, are taxing the rich. I wonder how you feel about it. The new taxes, do you think the city really needs new taxes on the rich and on corporations, or is there another way?
Well, first and foremost, let me say I wish that we could deliver a budget on time. I believe in being on time and having a balanced budget. The governor believes that there are other issues she wants to resolve before finalizing the budget. And so the issue of additional taxes, taxing the rich, taxing high income is on the table. I believe that the richest and most highest income New Yorkers just got a huge tax cut from the Trump administration. And so it is perfectly reasonable and sensible to ask those New Yorkers who got a tax cut to pay more in state taxes so that we can do things like continue health care for hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who just lost their health care because of the Trump administration cuts. But it's not just taxes. There are also big issues with regard to our climate law, our climate protection law,
She wants to
auto
delay that.
insurance. That's right. And those issues actually have no fiscal impact whatsoever. There's no impact from our revenues and from expenditures.
But it does have affordability impact for people at home.
That the governor's position is that the auto insurance reforms will make insurance premiums more affordable.
And climate change issues could also make things more affordable because of the cost of electricity.
That is what she purports. Of course, it's not so simple because we also have legislators, myself included, who are talking with advocates and looking at the data, and we're not necessarily seeing the same logical
Really?
conclusions. That's right. So, like take auto insurance for example. My insurance premiums are going through the roof. I'm sure everybody's is.
Mine too.
The proposals that she's put on the table seek to somehow curtail fraud. It sounds good. But
She's
we're
trying
not.
to say that there are a lot of fraudulent accidents reported, and that drives insurance rates up.
That's right.
You don't agree with that?
Well, I'm not saying I don't agree with it. I support her goal to lower insurance premiums, but we want to make sure that we put in a system that will, in the short term and long term, lower insurance
How
premiums
about just saying to the
without
insurance
taking.
companies don't charge so much?
We could say that, but we want to make sure that people still have protection also. We don't want to make insurance companies lower their premiums and gut the coverage, the protection that people have.
But what about the idea of the climate change proposals that she claims will help to reduce the high cost of power, electricity, gas, et cetera?
Well, that's another problem that our constituents are facing, ever higher utility bills. It's really gone through the roof, just as auto insurance premiums have. And so the governor is proposing a delay in our climate protection law. That law was passed, landmark legislation throughout the country, passed here in New York in 2019. She's seeking to delay many of those provisions.
How do you feel about that?
We're still discussing it in the Senate, and I know the Assembly is discussing it. Again, we don't want to make utility bills, electric bills, higher than they need to be. But at some point, we got to look at the long term, and we have to protect our climate as well. Otherwise, we may have lower bills now. It's only going to lead to much, much higher bills down the road for our children and grandchildren.
What about developing alternate kinds of power? For example, building more nuclear plants?
Well, nuclear is something that she's put on the table, but there are other forms of renewable energy, solar, thermal, wind. Those are all envisioned as part of the climate protection law now. But many of those initiatives will be delayed or completely canceled if we start pushing the timetables back.
I get the feeling you don't agree with that.
The jury is still out. The jury is still out. This is what we're deliberating, and this is why the governor's calling for more time to resolve the budget.
I want to go back to taxes for New York City for a second. I wonder if the fact that the City Council found $6 billion in ways to solve the budget crisis without cutting services and without new taxes, if that will affect the tax debate in Albany.
That would affect, because we are envisioning helping the city with, the governor, for example, has proposed an outright $1.5 billion transfer to the city of New York. In the legislature, we're talking about different ways that we can help the city make up their $5.4 billion deficit,
But
according to the Mamdani administration.
Without taxes.
Well, right now there's a big point of contention between the mayor's administration and the city council leadership, and we have to wait to see where the numbers really are. I think some of the fiscal monitors will be weighing in as well.
So I also want to talk to you about sanctuary laws, and that's another issue which usually should be decided outside the budget, but this year seems it's going to be in the budget. All kinds of things, including allowing people to sue ICE agents if they attack them and other things. How do you feel about including that in the budget?
I think well, we need legislation that will protect New Yorkers more than they do now with regard to ICE raids and officers being masked and unidentified. I mean, this is un-American. If we're going to be accused of something, of some kind of wrongdoing, it's in our American psyche and Constitution to be known who's accusing you, not by these masked agents. And now we see cases where criminals are posing as ICE agents under cover of mask. So that is just a very clear issue that we need state legislation on. Other states have introduced that and passed that kind of legislation. Whether that legislation is passed as part of the whole big budget package, which, as you know, the budget is just one ginormous law, or outside.
She usually likes to include that in the budget so she gets what she wants.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and you know the inside skinny on this, the governor has much, much more leeway and authority when everything's included as part of the budget. The legislature gets a little bit more influence and impact when we do things
After
outside the budget. Yes.
So also I wanted to talk to you about buffer zones. You know, there's been a rise in hate crimes.
Yeah.
And the city council passed a bill that would allow the NYPD to establish buffer zones around houses of worship and schools and things like that. But the legislature also has a bill the governor has proposed to establish, I think it's 25 feet, buffer zones 25 feet from houses of worship and schools, et cetera. How do you feel about that, passing it statewide? Well,
we definitely want people to never fear exercising their constitutional rights and practicing their faith, observing their faith, and going to their places of worship. At the same time, there are always concerns about, for example, what if there's a protest that happens outside a place of worship that has nothing to do with the place of worship? It just happens to be that that church, synagogue, or temple is in front of a well-traveled corner. Right. So we want to make sure that those safeguards are in place. On this point, there is not that much controversy among the legislature with regard to the governor's proposal. Certainly not as much as some of those other issues we've talked about.
So here's my last question. What effect does the fact that you and everybody running statewide has to face the voters in November, what effect will that have on tax policy this year?
You know, honestly, I don't think it has a lot to do with tax policy, because there are many of us who have constituents who don't want to see any kind of tax increases. There are many other legislators who have constituents who are clamoring for the rich to pay a fairer share. So we've all got different kinds of influences. I'll be very honest, my proposal that would tax personal income over $1 million, personal income in excess of $1 million, that's in reality going to affect like none of my constituents. But nonetheless, I think
the Assembly and Senate bills say tax people over $5 billion.
That's right. Well, yes. So my proposal is tax the income over $1 million. The Senate and Assembly have proposals that tax incomes over much higher thresholds. So they're even more palatable. But the point is, to answer your question, does the fact that we're all facing re-election this coming November have any impact on it? And I don't think so, because we also don't want to see budget cuts. We also don't want to see New Yorkers lose their health care. We don't want to see cuts in funding to our public schools. So it's all a matter of coming up with the right solutions, how much resource we need to have, and how best to prioritize that spending.
But is there also a concern that these people might decide to vote with their feet and leave the state? I mean, if you take a look at the numbers in the state, in New York State, there's about 60,000 people who would fit your category, who pay, I think, 40% of the taxes, some number like that. If those people go away, you have no money to pay for all the social programs you want to do. So don't you have to be careful that they don't decide to leave New York?
You're absolutely right. We don't want to lose population. We have lost population these last several years. But who is leaving New York? It's not people who would be subject to a higher tax rate. It is working class people, people who are much lower income. They're the ones who cannot afford to live and to stay in New York. So they're leaving. What we need to do is find ways to make sure that these people still have health care, find ways to lower their insurance premiums and housing costs, build more housing. These are the policies that we need to keep people in New York. And in order to enact many of these policies, we need more income and more resources, and who best to pay them than the people who just got a big tax cut from the Trump administration.
John Liu, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you at home for joining us as well.